vortex. Hi, this is Ray Harwood in the midst of a polar vortex here in northern Idaho. So we're pretty much -3. And we're going to be speaking with Thomas Seward, and he's going to be representing the uh, the SEAL organization for seal hunters, and he's going to share that with you right now. So go ahead, Tom.
Greetings. My name's Tom Seawood. A lot of people know me from Sasquatch Island, group that I run on Facebook, as well as a website and YouTube channel, even TikTok. And it's all about Sasquatches, how we do expeditions, conferences, television shows, documentaries, podcasts, videocasts, everything like that. But a lot of people don't know that, as you can see on my shirt here, that I'm also a member and president of Pacific Balance Marine Management. And the shirt that I'm wearing right now with that emblem also is this one here on the back of that shirt. And what Pacific Balance is all about is the harvest of seals and sea lions to help protect salmon and other finfish by bringing back the balance to our waters. So in the back here, I got a couple posters that you see, one with a seal with crosshairs. The other one is that joke guy you see on social media, and it says, "Dead seals can't eat salmon, changed my mind." And that's what it's all about, is salmon, steelhead, smelt, which we call hooligans in Canada, British Columbia, and herring and other finfish that are being eaten to extinction by the overpopulation of pinnipeds. Now, pinnipeds are the animals that we know with flippers and whiskers and round eyes, otherwise known as sea lions, California and Stellar, as well as the harbor seals, fur seals, and up in the Arctic, the walruses. So seals and sea lions were a staple for the coastal indigenous people all through Western North America, from the Baja through to the Bering, especially in British Columbia, where my tribe comes from, the Kwakwaka'wakw from northern Vancouver Island. So when you look at the archaeological evidence that is in reports from archaeological digs throughout the entire coast of North America, West Coast, you'll find that in the middens, which is the organic refuse and ash from our fires left in our village sites, harvest sites, and so forth, there's a high accumulation of bones, and most of them are marine mammal based. So you have a lot of seal and sea lion bones, as well as the waterfowl like grebes and what do you call those? I can't remember the name of the mergansers and cormorants that would eat juvenile small salmon and other finfish, and then the seal and sea lion bones that would eat the juvenile to the adult salmon. Well, God, the creator, and as we call him in the Kwakwaka'wakw, Ekekekame, he knew that we had to have balance and harmony in the animal kingdom. And that's why he sent, according to our legends, the Transformer, his brother, across the world in northern Vancouver Island, and transformed animals into human beings. Natural and supernatural animals became the what we call Nuyum, our first ancestors. And every family, we know our first ancestor, what animal we came from. But the reason for the transformation was these humans needed to go across the world and harvest all the animals to bring balance and harmony into that animal kingdom. Well, it was like that for thousands of years. The native people were harvesting all the animals and keeping that harmony and balance. And then the newcomers came from Europe and Asia. And all of a sudden, most of the Indians disappeared by the early 1900s from smallpox, influenza, tuberculosis, Spanish flu, and other afflictions that we weren't accustomed to, those diseases. And so, in turn, the newcomers who were commercial fishing and the sailors that first came, they needed oil for their lamps and other things. So they harvested the pinnipeds. They even harvested the manatee that used to be from the Baja California right through to Kamchatka, northern Japan, called the Stellar sea cow. They would harvest that pinniped to extinction, or manatee. I don't know if it's a pinniped, but anyway, they were harvested to extinction by the newcomers. But they also harvested the fur seals and the harbor seals almost to extinction. So in 1965, when I was born, my dad told me that, fishing sometimes wasn't very good, commercial fishing. So he had to find other means to support his new family. And me being the baby boy, he said, a lot of diapers were bought for you by seal noses. And I said, what do you mean? And this was when I was a kid. He goes, well, I used to go out like anyone else. We go to the Fish and Game office in British Columbia. It's called DFO, Department of Fisheries and Oceans. We'd go to the DFO office and they would give us a box of bullets to the caliber gun we had. And he said, I'd take the 30-30 bullets that were given to me free and I'd go out, and I was out clam digging and fishing for food for the family. But at the same turn, I was shooting seals, and I'd cut the nose off and I'd put it into a glass jar of salt. And, you'd accumulate quite a few seal noses after a couple months, and you would go to the fisheries office and they would dump out the jar of salt and sift it, and the little raisins, the seal noses that were all shriveled up and salted, they would count them, and you got $5 per nose. And in British Columbia, you got $8 per nose for a sea lion, which was a stellar sea lion, because the California sea lions, according to a report written by biologists, didn't pass a certain point in the Oregon coast. So there's a reason why they're called California sea lions. Their indigenous territory is California. And then if we know in our history from the 1980s, we know that Horace, the California sea lion, showed up at the Ballard Locks in Seattle, and he started decimating the steelhead, returning to spawn, waiting for the locks to open up. Soon, Horace had buddies show up, and they were just tearing apart the steelhead. And usually, what they do is just suck the eggs out. So they'll kill a fish, a salmon, a steelhead, and if it doesn't have the eggs, they just discard it. And I've seen rivers that are just blanketed with dead salmon coming to spawn, but the seals and sea lions are ripping their eggs out and not eating the rest of the fish. So 1964 or 68, they stopped the bounty for seals and sea lions in Washington State and up into Alaska, British Columbia included. And in 1972, Zsa Zsa Gabor and other Dudley do-gooders figured that they needed to stop the seal clubbing and hunt of whitecoats, the juvenile seal pups, on the East Coast on the ice floes in February and March. So Greenpeace jumped on board and other environmental organizations, and the public attacked the seal industry of Eastern Canada. And in turn, the government said, whoa, we got to do something because we have harbor seals in British Columbia and Washington State that are plummeting. And so, and sea lion populations are pretty low too, because, commercial fishermen and others were just plinking them and shooting them. And there used to be bounties. So the populations were down. So they created the North American Marine Mammal Protection Act. And in 1972, they disallowed the harvest and or the sale of seal and sea lion products in British Columbia. That also took place in California, Oregon, Washington State, and Alaska. And to this day, the North American Marine Mammal Protection Act, which I refer to as an obsolete document, it did its job. It protected from 1972 until the early 1980s the pinniped populations, and they exploded. And California sea lions, they trapped them in the Ballard Locks in the 80s, brought them back down to, I think it was San Francisco Bay, and released them with numbers branded into these sea lions from Washington. And it cost thousands of dollars. And all of a sudden, a couple of weeks later, Horace and his buddies showed up at Ballard Locks again. They traveled all the way back up because they knew it was easy pickings to get these salmon at these man-made barriers, like the locks. But more sea lions came up. And now in British Columbia, they estimate there's some 23 to 27,000 California sea lions will migrate into our waters. And what they're doing is they're harvesting with the stellar sea lions, which for some strange reason, more than likely because of the crash of food for the stellar sea lions, which are indigenous to northern Oregon through to Alaska, they were up in the Aleutian Islands in the thousands. Well, a lot of them migrated down into Alaska, southern Alaska, British Columbia, and even Washington State. And then the harbor seal populations have just exploded like bunny rabbits because no one's harvesting them. The indigenous people on the coast, we don't eat seal and sea lion like we used to. There's still a few tribes that do, but that it's not enough harvest to keep it in balance. Then, of course, we have all these people right away say, oh, what about the transient orcas in the Pacific Northwest, Canada and US and Alaska? Their numbers are increasing. Well, you're going to need probably a couple thousand transient orcas to bring the seal and sea lion population into balance. And that doesn't look like it's going to happen according to the sciences. So we have to reflect back to the native legends that it was the indigenous people, it was humans. They were the ones were the mechanism to keep the balance and harmony in the animal kingdom. And so we have to redevelop the pinniped industry of California through to Alaska, British Columbia included. So, as president of Pacific Balance Marine Management, I lead the First Nations, the North American Indians of British Columbia campaign to see our Canadian government give us license to be able to harvest seals and sea lions and being able to sell them. Now, it brings up a question. Why would you sell them? Well, number one, it's the organic meat of the sea. I've eaten seal and sea lion, and it's really good eating. There's no antibiotics in there or anything like that. We're uh, conducting toxicity tests right now in some areas, and eventually it'll be coast wide where we take seal meat and liver samples and send them into the laboratories and they test and find out if there's any heavy metal contamination. And if there is, they might say all the big males and females 5.5 feet and larger harbor seals are not fit for human consumption or pet food consumption. But anything 5.5 feet and smaller meets Canadian Food Inspection Agency's certification for human and pet food consumption. So here's your CFIA certificate to sell your seal meat, sea lion meat. The blubber is made into, actually, I'll grab it for you. The blubber is fat is rendered down, and even it is contaminated with heavy metals, the carbon, high pressure, high heat filtration systems, they can capture all of the toxic heavy metals. So you're left with the human safe food to eat or pet food safe. And they make these things, omega-3 seal oil.
Oh, wow.
And those are made in Eastern Canada where there is a licensed commercial seal harvest, harp seals, I think it is, for almost 30 to 40,000 animals per year. They don't get that number because it's hard. There's not that many hunters now, and the markets are pretty much shut down in Europe because of the EU ban on importation of Canadian and American and other seal and sea lion products, except the exemption because the Inuit up in northern Canada. Oh, by the way, here's seal treats for your dog. So they're dehydrated little nuggets, and dogs love them. So a lot of people that have dogs have huskies. It's, I think it's 2.7% of the dog population by pets in North America is huskies. And a lot of people know that huskies have hot spots, they have cracking paws, they have cracking noses, they have other afflictions. Well, it's because they're not getting what they're accustomed to getting. Omega-3 fatty acids, which is found in the seal and walrus and sea lion. So when you have pet food that is designed from or produced from pinnipeds, it's great for your husky breeds and other breeds. So there's markets for that. The pharmaceutical level, when it comes to the omega-3 fatty acids that are found in seal products, a lot of people say, oh, look after my health. I take cod liver oil or shrimp oil or other fish oil with omega-3s. Well, the omega-3 in fish and shrimp doesn't compare to the levels of omega-3 in seal and sea lion. And so Waspu and Canada's seal oil product is definitely good for you. And we found that in young seals, the brains, when they derive the different enzymes and things from them in the laboratories. Some tests were done in the last 6 years, and COVID kind of slowed it down. But they found that it would stop Alzheimer's and dementia in its tracks. That's huge. So, tasty meat, healthy oils, and then you have the skull market. Who knew there were skull collectors in this world? I went to a gentleman in Canada, and he wanted a Stellar sea lion skull, a big one. And he wanted willing to pay like $3,000 to $5,000. And I'm like, yeah, sorry, but I can't sell it to you. It's illegal. I
Yeah.
can gift it to you, but I can't sell it to you at this time. I'm working on trying to get licensed so we can sell it. So skull collectors want the skulls from all the pinnipeds. And then we have the North American Marine Mammal Protection Act that has disallowed the sale and importation and possession of seal and sea lion throughout the United States and even Canada. Well, that means that there's a void in the market for museums and educational institutions to have taxidermist animals in display, or the skeletons of those pinnipeds on display for biologists and others to study as they're getting their degrees, or school children to be able to go to a museum and see what, the skeleton of makeup of a harbor seal or a California sea lion differs from a stellar sea lion. So these are things that the North American Marine Mammal Protection Act is stopping. But what it's really stopping, and the environmentalists like me, I I'm an environmentalist. I don't believe in eradicating everything. But the environmentalists push, such as PETA and Sea Shepherd and Greenpeace and World Wildlife Federation and others. What they want to see is absolutely no redevelopment of the seal and sea lion industry. They don't want to see round eye, whisker face, cute little seals and sea lions or sea otters killed. But I keep educating people through Pacific Balance Marine Management's Facebook group and social media that I spread out, and television interviews and editorials and magazines and newspapers, that when you get the indigenous people, the North American Indian, in bed with government and industry, we are an unstoppable force. And as far as the environmentalists, when they want to look at stopping the macaw whale watch in the Olympic Peninsula's west side, northern tip, or they want to stop the North American West Coast harvest redevelopment of harvesting and selling seals and sea lions and sea otters, I tell them you're modern day General Custers, and you heads of your environmental organizations or any individual who wants to stop on or impede or protest our culture, uh, well, maybe you should buy a U.S. cavalry hat, put it on, put an ostrich plume in there and a yellow scarf and look like General Custer did, because that's what you are. You're a modern day General Custer Indian killer. Because when you stop our fish farming, our logging, our mining, our refinery development, our pipelines, our subdivision developments or casinos, what you're doing is you're socioeconomically and culturally suppressing the indigenous people. And as an indigenous individual, I have seen far too many of my friends and relatives that I've had to see shovel loads of dirt go on their casket because they died of suicide, drug overdose addiction, or alcohol. And what killed them was poverty, because one of our friends, passed away up in British Columbia, killed himself a while back because the protesters, the environmentalists who brainwashed a lot of Native Indians, stopped the fish farm industry in many regions within coastal British Columbia. And in doing so, many men and women got pink slips, they got fired. And when you live in a small coastal community that you can only access by a boat or a float plane, and there's no work, how do you feed your children when a gallon of milk costs you $8 to $12 and a pound of butter costs you $8 to $12? How do you feed your children when you don't have a paycheck because the fish farm plant is shut down, or the logging that you used to do over there is turned into a park and you can't log no more, and commercial fishing has collapsed? And one of the main reasons commercial fishing has collapsed is because of an overpopulation of seals and sea lions. So as a retired, I keep saying, commercial fisherman of 45 to 48 years, retired in April, I keep telling myself, but if I do need money and there's a good fishery, I'm going to go fishing. Even though my body's old and decrepit and broken down, I still have to go. But one of the things I seen is we were very efficient for salmon and herring up in British Columbia, and we overfished. And I remember days it haunts me, where we go out native food fishing to catch the prime number one sockeye, otherwise known as a red in Alaska and the United States. So we were just targeting the reds, the sockeye, but we would have a lot of pink salmon, and we would open the bulwark door, and with our feet, we would kick thousands of dead and dying pink salmon into the water, and you'd see them just flutter down like that. And in that were some chum salmon, dog salmon, and sometimes coal. And we keep the chinooks, the kings, and the sockeye, but we were high grading. And we did this year after year after year. I remember going into one of our coastal communities, and the low tide, you couldn't bring your boat close to the offloading place because there were so many dead pink salmon down there. It was like a mountain, thousands of them. And commercial fishing, we have a mentality of once it opened for commercial fishing, it's back in the day at 6 o'clock at night on Sunday. Your mentality was to catch every damn fish in that ocean. And we did to in a good case. So in life, having ethics and integrity, and you look back at what you did and what you helped destroy, and then all of a sudden you become a Sasquatch investigator and performer on conferences and television. Well, ethics and integrity tells me that, well, I can't be advocating protecting Sasquatches by creating the guidelines, which I've done on chance encounters and investigating of Sasquatch. And number one, no kill, no trapping, no disrespecting. So to do that, I have to look at no disrespecting. So as a commercial fisherman, when I fished and maybe helped destroy some of those spawning streams and creeks and rivers of salmon, and in other areas where we caught so much herring, instead of having 60,000 metric tons to 100,000 plus tons show up to spawn, they were seeing low numbers. But numbers are starting to come back because they shut down commercial herring fishing in most of coastal British Columbia, except for two small areas in the last few years. But anyway, I did my damage. So in beaches that should be just covered with spawning herring, well, the numbers are decreased because of overfishing. So ethically, I have to look at, okay, well, maybe I should do something good to see the increase of salmon, steelhead, herring, smelt hooligans, which is food for Sasquatch and humans. So when I was asked in 2018 to be the chairman of Pacific Balance Marine Management, or Pinniped Society at that time, it was a group of natives and non-natives. But then the non-natives, they started to try to be general custers and dictate to us Indians, you can't post that on social media account. You can't talk about that. And we just said, no, we're not going to be suppressed by you. So we broke away. They got rid of me. And then all the Indian directors resigned. And then 10 minutes later, I started Pacific Balance Marine Management, the First Nations, British Columbia Indian group organization to see the redevelopment of and license to sell seals and sea lions. And one of our number one goals is to work with the people in the United States, the sports fishing organizations, because they're losing their salmon and steelhead, and the hunting organizations, because if you have rivers that don't have salmon spawning or steelhead, you don't have bears and other animals. So the hunting organizations need to get on board and support us. And then you have the resorts and hotels that cater to the sports fishing industry and the bear watching industry. And the list goes on, so that Canada and US need to unite. We need to unify and put forward bills to our congressmen, to Congress and to Parliament up in Canada, that our governments work together to amend the North American Marine Mammal Protection Act so that people in the United States that are not North American Indian can purchase and possess seal and sea lion products. Because when you're a motorcycle rider and you wipe out at 65 miles an hour, it'd be nice to have nice, thick sea lion chaps on so you don't destroy your lower body parts. It'd be nice to have seat covers in your sports fishing boat that's seal fur, because water doesn't suck into seal fur. I used to have seal fur cover on my seat in my boat, and I would just go down there in the morning and lift it up, and you'd see all the pellets of water and dew and rain just run right off. And when I sat down, my bum wouldn't get wet if I didn't have rain gear on. And not to mention, usually I have a seal fur vest I'm wearing, but it's gray. I'll post some pictures on this when we get it to social media to show you the fashions and everything. and it's a huge industry in Canada and Greenland and other places. So there's no reason why we shouldn't harvest seals and sea lions. The environmentalists say right away, no, we shouldn't. Well, don't we harvest coyotes and deer and elk and moose and bears? Well, what difference is it that you can't in British Columbia, for example, when you submit online for your cougar tag, your black-tailed deer tag, and you enter a limited entry competition to hopefully get an elk tag or a mountain sheep tag or what do you call it, Dall sheep? Why can't we have licenses we can get to go out and harvest the seal? And because it's number one, it's good eating, makes damn good bait for shrimp traps and crab traps, and the fur. Well, who wouldn't want to have a gun case or a fishing rod case or a reel case or seat covers in your sports fishing boat made of seal fur? Because when you walk down the dock or the boat ramp, everyone's going to go, wow, that guy's cool. He's got seal hide stuff. And that's what they do to me when they see my vest. They're coming up and, oh, can I touch it? Can I touch it? Oh, it's so beautiful. Where can I get one? Sorry, but you can't legally possess that in the United States because of the obsolete North American Marine Mammal Protection Act. So when you look at me and I got a Sasquatch Island, which is my website about Sasquatches, and my shirt with the seal thing that has those posters on it, um, seals and Sasquatch. It's my industry. I'm doing a training program right now with my wife, where in British Columbia, we go and work with the local tribes and we teach them the legal aspects to harvesting seals and sea lions from a boat because there's all kinds of rules up in British Columbia. We teach them the humane dispatch of the animals so there's no suffering because that's a law in Canada. And also, people don't want to see or hear a suffering animal. So, how to shoot the animals without people seeing you? First thing you do, sure, there might be 100 seals on that rock, but there's a bunch of kayakers around the corner there, and there's a yacht traveling up over there. Number one, is it safe to shoot? Number two, are there going to be any negative ramifications from negative public opinion? Well, yeah, I got a sea kayak fleet there and I got a yacht right there. Maybe I should wait an hour or two until the boat's clear and then go do my harvest. We teach 100% retrieval of the animals because in most cases, when you shoot a seal or a sea lion, they sink. So don't go shoot it in 60 feet or deeper water. Get it in the shallows or on shore. And when you look at the shallows, make sure it's a shallow slope from the rock that's sitting in the middle here instead of being a pinnacle like that where it goes down into unretrievable depths. And then if the crabs and the prawns and the sea lice and the slime eels don't eat that animal underwater, well, eventually the food in its belly gases up. And now you got a stinky bloater floater that washes up on a beach. And now it makes the front page of the newspaper and the news, and all the pinniped sea lion huggers are all upset. And they phone their environmental organizations and go, those nasty people are shooting seals and sea lions and wasting them. So that's why we do the training course, so that they ensure 100% retrieval of animals and the right shooting scenario takes place. Then we teach them how to skin them, how to make the taxidermy cuts on them, because I was a grizzly bear hunting guide for many years. So as a trophy hunting guide for over 2 decades, I know how to do the proper skinning and everything. So we teach them that. We also have to get samples of the whiskers, the bottom jaw, the liver, the flipper, the meat, blubber, and those get submitted to our Fish and Game, our DFO, Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans in British Columbia, for all kinds of tests in the laboratories. And what we're trying to identify, and the stomach samples go into the university up in British Columbia on Vancouver Island South, so they can identify the species and the amount of food inside a seal and sea lion's stomach. So they want us to harvest in salmon migratory choke points for the juveniles and the adults and the ones that's living in between. And we want to identify what they're eating and how much so that we can have the scientific evidence showing that over a 12-month sampling program at this place where there's a lot of seals and sea lions, they're eating on average 6 million juvenile salmon per year in steelhead. Well, that's a smoking gun. That's too much because we already know right now in British Columbia that the combined numbers of seals and sea lions eat every month about 2 miles of semi trailers full of totes of fish, bumper to bumper.
That's amazing.
So it's obscene. It's not amazing. It's obscene. It is, as you'll see attached to this post, I produced a short documentary film called Eaten to Extinction. It's on YouTube. The links will all be on this post on social media. But as you can see, Sasquatch isn't just my passion. Yes, protecting Sasquatch is, but also protecting our environment so that we can have harmony and balance within the environment of the water once again in our rivers and our creeks and our streams and even lakes in some places. Because Vancouver Island, there's two lakes that had hundreds of seals, and one had sea lions as well because it was connected to the ocean. Well, the First Nations heeded my education on Pacific Balance Marine Management on Facebook, and they took matters into their own hands and they harvested the hell out of all the seals and sea lions. Now there's none in that lake, and their salmon populations are coming back up, as are their steelhead and trout. And northern Vancouver Island, the Indians up there don't want to seem to get off their butt and get up to the Nimkish Lake and remove some, if not all, of the seals that are in there because it's decimating and has been decimating since the 80s. There's salmon and steelhead and trout that are in that whole Nimkish River system. And then there's other places throughout British Columbia where there's hundreds, thousands of seals and in the river systems. So we have to do something. And what I say to people is, yes, I'm working with the governments trying to get license and regulations lifted and changed and Marine Mammal Protection Act ripped up or amended. But in the interim, boom, squeeze away those triggers, get the lead flying, just like that poster shows you with the crosshairs.
Right.
Harvest the herds. Because if you're a North American Indian, Canadian First Nation, waiting for the government, hell will freeze over before they come and do anything because they know that if they endorse a licensed, sanctioned seal harvest or, God forbid, a cull, it's political suicide. So the people in Fish and Game in Washington, Oregon, and California and Idaho, the people in the Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans in British Columbia, the people that are in the Alaska Fish and Game, they're scared shitless to sign any piece of paper or get in front of a camera and say, we are endorsing and initiating a harvest of seals and sea lions. And all we got to do is look at the Makah tribe on Olympic Peninsula North on how the politicians, bureaucrats, and fish and game officials had their tail between their legs and their head in the sand over a decade ago when it came to the Makahs wanting to harvest the whales once again. And they're in that process once again. I was out there during Christmas holidays, and I told some of the macaws I spoke to, don't wait for the white people to give you a piece of paper. Just get in your canoes and get out there and damn do it. They ain't going to stop you. The governments of Canada and US is so chicken shit of us Indians nowadays. They made a big mistake. They didn't eradicate us and kill us all. And what we became was educated Indians with our lawyers, our biologists, our doctors, and others. And now we are an unstoppable force. So grab your guns and get out there and start harvesting seals and sea lions to protect your salmon, your steelhead, your smelt, hooligan, herring, and everything else, because that's where we're at. But in the interim, I will do the bureaucratic dance with the politicians and the bureaucrats because I am the president of Pacific Balance Marine Management. So there you go. You got any questions?
Oh, that's excellent. Just on a similar note, we're just down to about 5 minutes, and I was just wondering, in the old days when you did harvest the seal or whatnot, what was a typical day like? Describe like your morning, your setup, your hunt. What was it like?
I've just heard through oral history and what I've read and pictures I've seen. You know, they basically what they did is they went out into a rock pile and they snuck up downwind over top and used their harpoons with lines on it with a big seal bladder, basically a seal hide that's a balloon. You know, then you can see pictures if you type in whaler, Indian whaler, black and white photograph. You'll see a picture of that whaler with the seal bladders for balloons. And yeah, that's the way I heard they used to do it. And harpoons are the big thing. sneaky. You can't just paddle up to a seal in most cases. Nowadays, when you go to Silver Balance Marine Management and you scroll back a couple of years, you'll see videos of Canadian First Nations chasing down sea lions into the shallows of the mouth of the river when the hooligans, that's what we call smelts, are going in to spawn. They're in the estuary and the mud flats, lower tide, and they're chasing them. And the sea lions are porpoising, and they're just right over top of the bow, boom, blasting them. And they call it dibbing up there, and they eat hundreds, over 200 sea lions a year. The Nishka tribe harvests for food. And that's what we need to see throughout the coast is more indigenous people eating it, sushi restaurants serving it, hot pot restaurants serving it. Go into your local seafood restaurant and have a choice. I've eaten so much seal and sea lion in different ways. It's great. Even you make it taste just like corned beef.
Well, I'm getting
So,
hungry just thinking
it's
about it. I'm getting kind of
what was that?
hungry. I could barbecue some up right now. It sounds really good.
Oh yeah. Well, like I say, when we get up to Canada with you, I'll give you some. We'll go shoot a seal.
Well,
I'm
that'd be
actually going
great.
to go up there next month. I got some food harvesting I got to do for shellfish and other stuff. But while I'm up there, I'm going to get a couple seals. I'll bring some down. You can try it.
Oh, great. And the as far as the grizzly bears and whatnot, and the polar bears, they eat seals, I imagine.
Well, it's been observed black bears and grizzly bears sneaking into seal rookeries and going after the seals. There is a few reports I've heard from British Columbia and even up in Alaska of Sasquatch harvesting sea lions, but not huge ones, the smaller ones, grabbing them by the flippers and banging them against a rock and then dragging them into the forest. I have a site where a friend of mine went in. He's got a big sea lion skull, and he found it on top of a pile of sea lion bones where he could see the forest all trampled at the edge inside the forest from the beach. And he get figured it was a family of Sasquatches dragged the sea lion up into the bush there and had a little chow down. Probably took him a week to eat that big thing because it was a big
Uh,
male.
uh-huh. That's really interesting. So, I guess we're out of time almost. You referred me to one walrus kill there in Alaska that there's actually a photograph from a distance of
Oh
like
yeah.
coastal horizon, and you can see this tremendous size Sasquatch with a large stick or club or something walking up to this dead walrus, and there's eyewitness testimonies of the walrus carcass, um, having a fur ball come up and down on top, and then other people witnessing the corpse, the carcass moving, and then here comes the Sasquatch out from the cavity, been feasting on this thing. Now it's online if anyone wants to see it. Here comes the seal right here.
Yeah. So anyway, if anyone wants to follow what I'm doing, Pacific Balance Marine Management on Facebook, and then SasquatchIsland.com is my website for Sasquatch stuff I do. And like I say, seals and Sasquatch, I'm making that's my industry, and hopefully it'll be an industry for many others because that's one of the things I've always been good at doing is helping to kickstart an industry. I was the first person to ever do commercial whale watching in 1980 when I was 15 out of a Zodiac speedboat. No one else was doing it, but I was doing it in coastal British Columbia